Well, I think I'm going to get started here, and I want to welcome everybody to On the Park Bench, a public square conversation brought to you by the Congress for the New Urbanism. Today we have urbanism and climate action, and we have as panelists today Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk, Ricardo Alvarez-Diaz, Michael Mehaffy, Jennifer Hurley, Doug Farr, Mallory Baches, and myself, Robert Steuteville. Just a couple of notes. Consider getting CNUA accredited, and you can sign up for CNUA. The benefits of accreditation provides a marketable credential to employers and clients. CNU accredited professional certificate, listing on CNU.org public members directory as CNU accredited. Go to CNU.org/get involved/get CNU accredited. And mark your calendars for CNU 35. CNU 35 will be in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, June 15th through 18th, 2027. Go to cnu.org/CNU 35 to find out more. And we have a very exciting panel today. And all of these panel members are co-authors of A Necessary Response, the Climate Action Handbook for Urbanists. Ricardo Alvarez-Diaz is an architect, educator, author, and thought leader whose work bridges academia, professional practice, and community impact. He is co-founder of Alvarez-Diaz and Villon. He serves as an adjunct professor at the University of Notre Dame, and he is founder of Andalani Press, which published A Necessary Response. Mallory Baches is the president of the Congress for New Urbanism. Mallory brings 25 years of international work in planning, urban design, and community development to her role, as well as a wealth of experience in nonprofit leadership. Douglas Farr is founder of Chicago-based Farr Associates, a pioneering sustainability-driven architecture and urban design firm that plans and designs lovable and aspirational buildings and places. Jennifer Hurley is principal of Placemakers, visiting assistant professor in growth and structure of cities department at Bryn Mawr College, and Institute for Social Innovation fellow at Fielding Graduate University. She has been active in the New Urbanism movement for 25 years as a planner. Michael Mehaffy is a researcher, educator, author, and practitioner with 10 university appointments in research and/or teaching in 8 countries. He earned his doctorate in architecture at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, where his research focused on climate change and urban form. Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk is a founding partner of DPZ Co-Design and the Malcolm Matheson Distinguished Professor of Architecture at the University of Miami, where she was Dean of the School of Architecture for 18 years. At Plater-Zyberk teaches courses on urban design, zoning, and adaptation to climate change. She is a co-founder of CNU. A Necessary Response, the Climate Action Handbook for Urbanists. This is what the book looks like, published by the Congress for the New Urbanism with Andalani Press. CNU sought to bring together the best thinking of new urbanism on climate. We wanted to present the theory, to identify and explain some of the best projects dealing with climate, and to create a toolbox for dealing with issues related to climate change. So I'm going to go through this book fairly quickly, but it's an important statement of CNU's on the part of climate change and where it stands in terms of climate action. The first section is makes the case for why urbanist climate solutions are important. And the first chapter, Measuring the Impact by Michael Mehaffy, is an excellent summary of the science behind why urbanism is such an important response to climate change. Urban places not only reduce carbon emissions, but they are more resilient and adaptive. Not only that, the benefits of urbanism are locked in long term. Unlike many other solutions, if you have good urban form, it has benefits for climate, not just today or this year or this decade, but the benefits last for centuries. It is not just an effective solution, it is a long-term solution or a long-term response to climate change. Climate Migration, A Shifting Landscape is the next chapter by Matthew Lambert, and explains the categories of climate migrants: the able and aware, the affluent and ignorant, and the refugees. Also, climate migration that is local, regional, and national. This is a thorough explanation of what is likely to happen with climate migration geographically and how that affects urban planning. We have a real opportunity to make improvements in our built environment as people move and to prepare for what is likely to happen as a result of various climate crises. The next chapter is Disaster Recovery, a New Urbanist Perspective by Ricardo Alvarez-Diaz. New Urbanists have done some of the most important work in disaster recovery. Ricardo explains why the principles of urbanism are essential in recovering from a climate disaster, but also some of the pitfalls. If you're not careful, for example, recovery can accelerate sprawl. So now we're into the middle part of the book, which is New Urbanism Supported Actions. And this really became the heart of the book. It's the toolbox. We called them climate actions, and there are 38 in all. I thought of these as patterns that can be applied to the built environment. They are organized according to a taxonomy, and this comes, creating taxonomies comes natural to new urbanists. Question, how many new urbanists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is 2. 1 to change the light bulb, and 1 to draw a transect of light bulbs. The first taxonomy cut that we made was my mitigation and adaptation. That's what most of the discussion had been around up to this point. And Liz Plater-Zyberk suggested that adaptation should be further broken down to adaptation to what? And the categories we came up with are severe heat, storms and floods, sea level rise, drought, fire, and wind. But then as there was a bunch of actions that didn't really seem to fit in any one of these categories, and that's how we came up with the remainder category of resilience. And resilience allows communities to adapt to multiple chronic and catastrophic climate impacts at the same time. I'm going to go through these basically these pages and these sections fairly quickly, but starting with resilience, communities that become resilient are better able to survive all kinds of climate-related disasters. The number 1 action on the list relates to one of our keynote addresses at CNU 34 and the social scientist Eric Kleinenberg, who has shown that fewer people die in a disaster when communities have stronger social bonds. And the strength of those bonds relates to the physical form of community. Number 2 is to improve street connections. The more street connections, that's a founding principle of new urbanism, the better access and egress during an emergency. You've also got local systems, localized systems that sustain life, use receiver places for new growth, streamline approvals and planning, conduct a climate resilience audit. We have the section on adaptation, and we tried to speak plainly. So reduce outdoor temperatures is the first on the list. That's right, we're trying to cool the whole neighborhood with urbanism. And this may come as a surprise to many people because they have heard so much about urban heat islands. And don't cities make everything hotter? Not necessarily. Urbanism used intelligently is very effective at reducing outdoor temperatures in the public realm. Here are some others: plant and preserve urban trees, shade the pedestrians' building elements, design for natural breezes and cooling, study shade, use light-colored building materials and pavement, set up cooling and emergency shelters, add water features, leave natural coastal defenses in place, protect compact places with flood defenses, and many others. All of these are explained so that you can actually put them into a plan. Elevate streets and public spaces, design parks for stormwater detention, build disaster relief cottages, and more. And then we get to mitigation. Urbanism is a powerful tool for mitigation in terms of reducing carbon emissions locally and regionally. If you have a goal for reducing carbon emissions, the tools related to urbanism are essential. The first two actions are use sustainable energy at a community scale, build infill first, reduce parking requirements, build transit-oriented development, etc. What these actions amount to are tested patterns that can be tailored to individual places and applied in combination to one another. The 38 actions listed are not the be-all and end-all, but they can be added to. But the toolbox is useful. It's the first time it's been gathered and organized according to resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. And we believe the taxonomy is an effective way to think about these actions. The next section involves implementation. And we start off with Liz Plater-Zyberk, who has been thinking about how communities respond to climate change for many years. These are responses, not solutions to climate change, she explains. And climate impacts are either catastrophic or chronic. And there are four basic adaptation actions: defend, accommodate, retreat, clean up. Her essay is a pillar of this book. And effective public engagement by Jennifer Hurley is the next chapter, and explains why climate issues are different from other issues that planners and urbanists contend with. And therefore, public engagement must be different. And she explains how. And this is a very useful essay for those who are doing public engagement. And now we get to Andres Duany, who couldn't be here today. All the work in identifying, explaining, and categorizing actions does not solve the issue that has been at the heart of debate among urbanists for years, and that is what to do. What do you lead with when you go into a community to do a plan? Andreas makes a strong case for leading with adaptation. And Douglas Farr, on the other hand, makes a strong case for leading with mitigation. And he gives an explanation of a very important concept of electric urbanism. It's helpful to read both of these arguments made so well, and I hope they're both useful depending upon the situation. And we come to the case studies in the book, and we have one on Savano in Tucson, Arizona. Many of you are probably familiar with Savano and a few of the other case studies, but the important thing is we're talking only about the issues related to climate, and there's details in these case studies that you probably have not heard before, even among the projects you're familiar with. A strategic waterfront vision, Panama City, Florida. Community energy systems, Maplewood, Ithaca, New York, Norton Commons, Louisville, Kentucky. Desert responsive urbanism, cul-de-sac in Tempe, Arizona, and the coastal risk management in Norfolk, Virginia, and Charleston, South Carolina. The Higher Ground Initiative in the island Republic of Nauru in the Pacific Ocean, which is dealing with sea level rise, and Adaptation Village in Denver, Colorado, which is a theoretical case study. And finally, Mallory wrote both the introduction and the conclusion. These essays bookend the publication, they frame it, and they give the whole book context. So to purchase the Climate Action Handbook, go to from CNU, go to www.cnu.org/resources/CAH for Climate Action Handbook. Now, that's it. We can get into a discussion, and I want to let the audience know that we will have a first have a panel discussion, then we will have Q&A from the audience. So please use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask your questions as they occur to you, because we'll get to them more or less in the order that they are asked.
Thanks so much, Rob. I'm going to take it from here and ask the panel a few questions that I've prepared. And I want to start by thanking everyone, both the panelists who are here today, certainly for being here and for contributing to the book, and also for all of the authors. We had folks, submitting the case studies and helping us in reviewing the action items. And to give a little context, this book was the contents of this book are something that I inherited when I became a project that I inherited when I became president at CNU. This is, a group of urbanists that you see here on this panel and that have contributed to the book that have been working for quite a while on specific issues related to the connection between urbanism and climate change. They've been working together and collaborating on how best to make an impact. And so I want to explore that a little bit with our conversations today, starting with the fact that the book is titled A Necessary Response, the Climate Action Handbook for Urbanists. So I wonder from the panel why you each feel that this book was really important to create, the discussions that have led to this, the arguments that have led to this book, and the collaborations over the years on implementing different techniques that have led to this. Why is this book then so important? And I welcome anybody to jump in with an answer.
So, Mallory, I'll jump in because I've been working on this. That Rob mentioned, my PhD was on this subject and something I've been evangelizing for many years. And I think the issue is that urbanism is one of the biggest factors. The research is pretty clear on that. And yet it's also one of the least recognized factors, and, partly because people don't see it. It's a systemic effect, right? And a lot of the things that we talk about, they're not silver bullets. They're these small factors that all add up to a very, very big picture. So I think this book is important and this work is important in order to make a clearer awareness of how what we can do. This is not simply an academic discussion. There are practical things we can do and things that are not only benefits for the climate, but benefits for people and livability and quality of life and economic development. And these things are related. They're not either or. That's another big takeaway I have.
I would be happy to add to that. I think that was a great beginning, Michael. I interact with a lot of people on this topic outside of the CNU, and my understanding of it from that perspective is that it's many things to many different people. Mm-hmm. And if you spend time with scientists, for instance, who are very much aware of the impacts and the reasons for the impacts, for instance, but less well versed in adaptation or what to do about it once it's happening. They speak of complex systems as if this was a revelation of a new way of thinking about things. And they start identifying what all those complex systems are. And Michael just mentioned some of the elements. And I listen to that and I say, we new urbanists, we do that all the time. We do that every day. So we have I think the wonderful thing about this book is that it actually gives you that very broad picture in a very general but also specific way, which makes it intelligible and isn't just one piece of the picture. It's not just the science. Michael has wonderful footnotes that of the research that underpins some of the adaptation or resilience aspects. Doug's background, everybody who's on this call and is part of the book has a piece of the action, so to speak, and is presenting it in a way that you can walk away with an overall understanding that comes to you very clearly, I think, presented. So I don't think there's anything else like it. And I didn't know what we would all start out with when you set out on this, Mallory and Rob. But I think it's a kind of unique and powerful combination of things.
I'll go, or go ahead, Jen. You.
I just wanted to add on that I think it's important that Liz framed these as responses, not solutions. And I think it's really important that the responses people see are things that can be joyful and add to their quality of life and be something that people want to do. Because if it's not going to happen. We're not going to get there. And so one of the things about this book is that it shows how the responses can add to the quality of life in so many other ways. So that's why I think it was important.
I'll go. Good morning, everybody. So my perspective is a yes and on what Michael and Liz and Jennifer have said. I guess there's also a regional thing going on here, which is so many of my urbanist sisters and brothers live and function on coasts, oceanic coasts. We live on the third coast, which is stands to benefit from urban migration, et cetera, as a result of climate. But I'm focused on the climate. Urbanism is climate action. It's full stop, full stop, full stop, and it's all but permanent. The benefits of the climate benefits and all the quality of life benefits of urbanism persist for generations and centuries. So the work we do is so important. The part of it that I like to highlight that isn't necessarily on people's minds is that as we design places, particularly greenfield and major redevelopments and so on, we also put in place the infrastructure that supports that place that also persists for generations and centuries. And so we're at a kind of inflection point where the right infrastructure, I think, is to have no fossil fuel and all electric infrastructure. And so that is a choice that's available to all urbanists planning at that scale. And it's often sort of off the radar screen. It's not visible when you're walking down the street and having your ice cream cone on Main Street. Does it matter to that moment of quality of your life, whether the building you just entered was heated with gas or electricity? It doesn't affect it, so it's invisible. So it's kind of easy to not have on your mind. But I think this is one of the most powerful impacts that urbanists have, is laying in place fossil fuel infrastructure that will be there 20 and 50 and maybe even 100 years from now because we chose to put it there in 2026. So I'm hope for the Q&A to talk about that a little more. Thanks.
Well, I just want to add that for me specifically, the importance of this book is enormous from a humility standpoint. Because I think that as professionals, we try to find solutions to problems. But when you are within a catastrophic situation yourself, you become humble very quickly. I am from Puerto Rico, and I think it's going to be 9 years ago, we were hit with 2 hurricanes in 2 weeks, Maria and Irma. And it was incredible how all the systems and all the ideas and all the things just fell apart. And the humility that I learned from that experience, which I think that this book showcased in many different ways, is the same thing that New Urbanist, we've been talking about for years, is the creation, is the importance of community creation and development. Not housing, not anything. It's just community. And how quickly communities that were solid, that had connectivity, that had relation, that they were able to walk to a center of a town, etc. From a data standpoint, they started to move towards recovery very, very quickly. And the humility part of it is that sometimes we focus too much on top bottom, but then we forget the placemaking mentality of that bottom up also has to connect. And I think that this book allows us to also showcase a lot of the information, so those communities outside of what planners, architects, etc., can also learn and be aspirational. This is a book that should be read by everyone but us. So, but anyway, thanks for that.
That's great, Ricardo, because that brings me to, I alluded to this, but I want to give a little bit of the, a little bit more of the background and then the strategy for this book. As I said, I, inherited this project, and New Urbanists had certainly been talking about climate change amongst ourselves and with our, colleagues outside of the movement, but exactly how to make an impact was something that, there was a climate committee that I started coming to the meetings of when I became president and listened to folks talking to each other. And a lot of that was about strategy, about how our ideas can really play a larger role in national and international response to this challenge. And so, the eventual work that led to this book was with, an awareness of the stage of the strategy of sort of grounding what New Urbanists collectively agree upon and believe about our work in terms of the crisis. But I'm wondering for the panel, who else would we like this book to be in the hands of? This is a book certainly that CNU wants to see every member of the organization, every member of our audience picking up and adopting into their practice. But where beyond our movement would we hope that these ideas and the book itself get into the hands of? I wonder if anybody has thoughts about that.
I think every FEMA official should get this for free. But I didn't mean to make a joke, but the truth is that there's a lot of things that we can do, but policy is everything. And without clear policy and understanding necessarily, even if we're well-intended, after a situation that, and I'm talking about recovery again, but the problem is that we can talk for hours about many of the things that we need to do, but at the same time, finances control a lot of those decisions. So if the federal government and several of the decision makers within the federal government do not understand the big picture and the difference between cost and investment, it's going to be a challenge for us to really implement many of the things that we've learned throughout all these years. So yes, FEMA officials, every single one of them for free.
We'll make that happen. Anybody?
I'm going to differ a little bit on that because I do think policy is an important tool. We have design, policy, and management as our important tools. And but I think policy, as we have engaged in the past, has to be very specifically directed and targeted. So this book, I think, is really for the general public or for people who want to know more about the big picture. But if you're going to talk to FEMA, if we are going to talk to FEMA as an organization, I think we need to really decide what the point of that entry is going to be. What's the goal? It's going to have to be a very specific goal that, yes, they deal with all of these tragedies and impacts, as Ricardo is pointing out. But if we want to be effective, I think we have to be very specific about what we want to change. And this is a very difficult time to guide that change because there are certain words that are proper to use in grant applications and so on, and others that are not. And actually, it's very important that you put resilience in the book because that indeed is an acceptable term in our time. In fact, as the federal government is trying to push the responsibility down to the state levels, the act or the presidential document which promoted that had used the word resilience. So perhaps that's something we could focus on and then say, is there anything specific we want to put our clout behind, our efforts behind, or is it the more general picture that the book is providing, that this is a moment of education rather than trying to achieve a particular end?
And Liz, I think you're really emphasizing that this book is not the end of the story. It's really a conversation starter, and we do need those other approaches and other discussions that are more specialized with different sectors. But the other group that I'd like to see this book go to is and the follow-ups is mayors and senior staff of cities who can make the changes, make the zoning code changes and the policy changes and the other things at the local level that I know we're already working on that. And I think this book will be a contribution to that.
Yeah.
The first thing that occurred to me was all of the engineers that are working on resiliency plans and flood mitigation plans and adaptation plans. You know, the large A&E firms that have engineers working on those plans. When they put forth in their plans various actions, at least half the ones that are in this book are just not even on their radar screen. And it sort of brings to mind the work that CNU did over decades, really, with transportation engineers. But there's a whole realm of water engineers that we need to be engaging with.
I think the county level is also a really good level of government for these types of reforms because they are often working on plans for climate change. At least in this part of the country, that's where the departments of health are located, so they often do these kinds of plans, whereas city government doesn't necessarily take it on.
Rather than answer Mallory's question about what audience needs to get this book, I would say two things. One is, as other speakers have said, we've planted a flag that this is an important topic. We've started stirring things up, so I think that's good. And within the CNU, you know, when one book appears, 10 books will follow. So that's a given. But the second thing is, I feel like, you know, I put this in the kind of bucket of the most impact that the CNU has had in terms of climate action is preventing sprawl and replacing it with walkable urbanism. That's it. That's number one. Number two, I would say, is electric urbanism going forward, which wasn't sort of a thing on our minds. But I know the organization has had cycles in which we feel like we can impact the prevention of sprawl, and other times like that's too hopeless. We just need to do excellent projects and people will copy us, all that kind of thing. But our theory of change about sprawl is a climate action. And I do think sprawl persists as the dominant form of development in America. And so there's this big disaster, rolling slow disaster that's still going on. And that to re-engage in that really basic thing of let's just sell urbanism, and at the same time might be an easier sell as electric urbanism. So it's not an audience, but it's kind of a vision going forward.
Yeah. I think that perhaps takes us back to, as you pointed out, Doug, the point that new urbanism is climate action, that our ideas are fundamentally the foundation that can be a part of many of these then added responses, technological responses, governmental responses, et cetera, et cetera. Well, knowing that we have some Q&A, I want to allow the audience to get to ask these folks some questions. So Rob, I'm going to turn this over to you to manage the Q&A from here on out.
Okay, once again, please ask your questions with the Q&A function of Zoom. And the first question from Scott: how is the panel reflecting on suburban retrofits and adapting suburbia for climate action solutions in North America? Anybody have thoughts on climate action in suburbia?
Yes, first of all, let's praise Ellen and June, who may be on the call. I don't know if they are, and Galena for their work in sprawl repair and suburban retrofit. So that's number one. Number two, what strikes me when you look closely at suburban retrofit, all of it, is how rare it is. There is one notable suburban retrofit per 1,000 or 10,000 examples of new sprawl. So it's rare, it's carbon intensive, and the better thing to do is to prevent the creation of the thing you later want to fix. So I'm doubling back on my idea, like the best climate action work CNU could do would be to prevent new sprawl.
Well, Doug, and that makes me think that as far as audiences go, I thought the mayors were a great example, but I think the world of the developer is an important one to address because in some ways that is a world that benefits by being myopic. You need focus on the project that you're working on and understanding that every project could use some of the 38 suggestions without a great deal of pain. I think would be very useful to that group. And so, Mallory, maybe we should make some kind of effort to intersect with the ULI,
Mm-hmm.
other developer groups, and maybe we can call on the Association of Town Builders to help with that because that's the great thing about the book is that all of a sudden it makes it real in many different pieces. Everybody can take a piece of it and apply it to their project.
And there was a lot of work done in the sprawl retrofit initiative, which I lament that it didn't get continued. But for example, the strategies of actually doing some very doable, profitable things like creating a town center in an area that's underdeveloped within sprawl, that people see as an amenity and actually support. You don't get the NIMBY factor. And I've seen that personally in my own work. So there are things that can be done with sprawl retrofit that there's a real missed opportunity or an underachieved opportunity that I think we should go back to. And related to that is this idea of the toolkits of strategies that we've already discussed in many cases that we can apply, that we can make available to people. The pattern language toolkit, Doug, I'm a big fan of that as a methodology to create a vision that's implementable. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities around sprawl retrofit, not only in the US, but this is a global phenomenon, fortunately.
I should mention that some of the case studies actually, are suburban case studies or deal with suburbia, with cul-de-sac and Savano and Norton Commons.
Rico
The
Station with the Greenfield.
so the book does have some examples, but obviously much more can be done.
Quick footnote, did anybody know that cul-de-sac is an all-electric project?
Mhm.
No fossil fuel.
No.
No billboards. It made economic sense for the developer. They just did it.
That's wonderful. I
But
think
it goes to the point that Liz said, and Mallory and I have had long conversations about the re-education of developers. Today is a little different than 30 years ago, and it might be that they're including 4 or 5 things that maybe 10 years ago they would not even include, but that's 4 or 5 things that are good. So that engagement is very important, and then see what's happening, because even though, yes, the idea of suburbia is exactly what we don't want to do, and what I've seen is that every time there's a situation like the one that I talked about before, the short answer is, okay, we just have to build houses for everyone. But there's not an understanding of how to, go about that community creation. So the engagement of developers, I'm having them lead this instead of us leading it is a transformational thing that allows them and us, because some of us are involved in that too, to take ownership. And I think Doug said it correctly. I mean, it becomes an issue of value creation instead of only cost. And I've seen it because when you start thinking a little long term instead of what do you need to do now, and the fact that the end user too has a much better understanding today than what they were asking 30 years ago. going back to the question about who should read this book, obviously, everyone should. My joke is that we shouldn't because we supposedly know a lot of the stuff. But the truth is that the end user is pushing many of these policies within, or not policies, but many of the creative ideas that developers are bringing up on projects outside of the city.
And as we reach out, read Jennifer's chapter first, because it has many important things to keep in mind as you're really talking to anybody about these subjects.
I just wanted to say the single family detached house neighborhood is the land use pattern that is the most resistant to change. And don't do that. Like, just leave them alone. Let them be what they are. There's so many opportunities for suburban retrofit in, dying malls and strip centers and other places that people already don't like in the community. Focus the suburban retrofit effort there. You don't need to poke that bear. It's not going to do you any good.
I agree to a sense, but also I think you have to be a little strategic. I mean, in Washington State and Oregon, where I'm based, there are state laws now that go into single-family neighborhoods. And the initial approach was very confrontational and, NIMBYs versus YIMBYs and all of that. And I think what's happening is we're finding a QIMBY model, quality in my backyard, that's proactive, that supports the neighborhood and the neighborhood quality, that does things like ADUs and other forms of general density. I think there's some opportunity there too. I mean, I wouldn't stay completely away from that. I think that's one of the tools in the toolkit.
Another question. I work in South Florida as a planner. Life safety and property protections take the forefront of prioritization in these areas subject to significant flooding and weather dangers, and beneficial urban form get deferred. How can it be communicated that good urban design is a means of accomplishing these goals? Any thoughts?
I would say that it's you have to become creative and understand who your audience is, because there's too many different types of audiences. When you present to a government official, it's different than when you present to a community leader. And being able to be flexible enough that understand who's the end user, and then maybe modify the way you present it based on who that audience has been very successful for us, especially going through many of the challenges that you normally see. So be patient, not get frustrated, and try to put yourself in what are the actual answers that some of the people that you are going to talk to are looking for. And again, remember that they're not going to be exactly the same maybe answers that another group might be waiting and expecting to hear from a strategic standpoint.
But the question, I'm not disagreeing, Ricardo, but I'm going back to the question which talked about life safety taking precedence over urban design, I believe. But in fact, urban design, and especially with regard to impacts, is about life safety, whether it's flooding in Florida or fires in California. And, there's some new urbanists using the transect in doing studies with federal funding with regard to fire in communities in California. So I think we can couch this in terms of the big concerns, and the concerns that then give cover, let's say, to the leaders, to the elected leaders, and say, we're working on this because it's a life safety issue. If you don't increase the number of routes in and out, or if you don't start raising the streets, or adding, maybe the first thing is adding the swales making more unpaved space, depaving. These are costly, maybe costly efforts, but they are about life safety. And part of life safety is access. One of the things that Florida has used a lot is, the escape route for hurricanes, but it's also just, that flooding can prevent you from getting an emergency vehicle in, or, the whole unhealthy aspect of flooding as well.
I think we have to always keep reminding people as well that one of the biggest life safety problems we have is traffic crashes. And in terms of numbers of deaths and injuries, that's still a much bigger life safety problem than flooding and fire.
True.
But all of these concerns
They all work together. Yes, we just shouldn't let the concerns about one trump the concerns about another. We have to address all of them.
We have a question from described as an academic question from political science PhD, and relating to Michael Mehaffy's point about identifying urbanism as the biggest factor in climate change, which ironically is the least talked about. How can we push for more attention to these topics? And what can we do to get academics on the urbanist side and repeating the urbanist message?
That's a great question, and it's something I've sort of been struggling with myself for quite a few years now. I think there's an inherent problem here, which is, again, urbanism is a systemic effect, and it's a very powerful effect, but because it's systemic, it's not easy to see. And so I think if we talk about the sort of big picture of quality of life and livability, and then some case studies, and I think I used the example there with looking at Amsterdam, that photo, and you can actually do side-by-side case studies and see the difference. I've also got a slide that shows the greenhouse gas emissions in different environments that are, one is clearly more livable and appealing than the other, and the greenhouse gas emissions are also very, very different. So tying those things to things that people can experience and understand and that they care about, like livability and quality of life and health and economic development, et cetera, I think is what we've got to do, and not just be focusing on the doom and gloom aspect, which we need to talk about, but maybe not focus just on that. And as Jennifer said, I think we need a positive vision as well.
I think the most effective way to get academics to focus on something is to have funding for research. And Robert Wood Johnson's funding of the health impacts of various transportation design issues resulted in a huge amount of publication. And then because of that, a huge amount of discussion and attention. So I don't know where the magic pot of money is, but that is the way to get academics to pay attention to something.
And also priming the pump with our own research and what they've done at Notre Dame, our group working on research and compiling, doing the survey of the research and then publishing the results of that to get other researchers to say, oh, wait, this is, something, this is a thread I can follow, as well as getting the funding. Obviously.
So, that's not unlike the policy suggestion. It really needs a single focus, I think. Or if you're going to make a concerted effort to get a foundation to say, okay, let's repeat the Robert Wood Johnson experience or imitate it, to try to get a lot of funding out there, to get a lot of research going on something. It was walkability. It was walking in health. That's how it started. What would that be? And we played a role in that. We had a symposium at the Seaside Institute that brought the Robert Wood Johnson people together with new urbanists to discuss, how really for them to understand how this could play a role in health, what we were doing. And so, maybe we pick one thing to
You
focus.
know, the work that
action.
Kleinenberg has done on resilience and walkability and social infrastructure. I think that could be an angle that's, you know, the issue about climate change specifically and heat events.
Well, right now, social connectivity is, I think, a big topic. It's related to social media and AI evolving and so on.
Right.
But I'm not sure that's the one, but maybe it is. And maybe there's another one that should be the next one.
We have a question. Do you think we'll succeed in stopping new sprawl and building electrified new urbanism without confronting the fossil fuel industry through political organizing and policy implementation? That's interesting. What is the role of the fossil fuel industry in terms of planning and building local communities?
I'll take a first swing. Excuse me. I'm just starting to learn, and I invite everybody to fill me in on what I don't know, which is a lot, about the persistence of easements, covenants, franchise agreements, and so on that basically make it the default that every new subdivision or major redevelopment will have natural gas infrastructure. So if you try and show up and say, I'm going all electric, we found this working with DPZ in Florida. No, you're not. The local utility has a right to subdivide your land and put easements on it that serve every building with gas. So that's a reality that I don't really understand. So the lawyers and the policymakers on the call hit me up and fill me in on that. So, but I do think there's a consumer preference issue that CNU has mastered 30 years ago to say people just like urbanism. I think people would like electric urbanism just as good and if not better than urbanism. And there's a health angle. I don't know, Liz, if this passes your threshold test for the next topic to push research around. But, Americans and I guess humans now spend 90 to 95% of their time indoors, despite us urbanists making walkable places. We're just sitting there in front of the screen in air conditioning, sitting around, right? So that's where the gas cooking becomes a huge health impact. And so going from gas cooking to electric, you'd say that's not an urbanist issue, but I wish it were because it's a higher quality of life, higher health, and the combination of getting you outdoors and having indoor air healthy is a winning consumer combination. And it makes more money for the developer if they know what they're doing.
Not to argue with that, but going after FPL or the gas companies or any of the big fossil fuel entities, at least right now, is a non-starter. And I think aiming at the powers that be maybe has never been our strong point as much as changing the culture. And the things that we've done because they get, they're on the ground and people can see how they work, are part of that culture change. And we've also, we've got people like the other organizations that are around us that are part of that. The Town Builders, the Chuck Marone's group, the Guild, whatever it is, are part of that large effort. Now, it may not be curtailing sprawl entirely, but it is influencing people like Lennar. And if we, one policy change in every community that says you have to have a block size, you can't have a single entry PUD, we need multiple connections, could be one way to address some of the suburban sprawl, and that could be addressing climate issues in some way. But I think we need to think about what is our strength. So I know that FPL is more powerful than any of us in more ways than we want to. And when our president does a New York Times op-ed that says we're going to save single family housing. That was in the first administration. Then you're up against some pretty big forces that we probably should not waste our time on. We should be, as Jennifer said, working on the space that you can work in, and be effective in, and change people's minds and hearts by what they see.
Can
I
I,
think that's
yes, can I yes and on Liz in terms of not going head to head with utilities that you're going to lose? One thing that has been an occasional superpower of CNU is collaborating with other organizations. And so I'll just say the thought that all electric development, urbanism or otherwise, is cheaper and more profitable for developers might just give us kind of a three-legged race with the national home builders who might see it in their interest to say, these rules, I mean, we've been great for generations at CNU has been great at fighting bad rules. These rules that compel us to lay these pipes in the ground at great expense that I intend never to use are our common enemy. So just saying, if we get, maybe we're in the room with them and say, by the way, now that you've got your gas pipes out of here, what about a street grid? So anyway, just saying there's a kind of there's an itch, there's an opportunity there that maybe we can exploit. Mallory, get it done, whatever it is.
That's right. I will say to jump in there on that, and there have been a couple of questions about this, that CNU is sharing, providing copies of the handbook if it's, whether you're talking about like interested faculty members at colleges and universities around the country and beyond. A question about anchor institutions and beyond higher education, but to our partners at like Smart Growth America, for example, that we're in the process of sharing out copies of the book, and eventually we'll be sharing out, especially for faculty members, we'll be sharing out a digital version that can be used as a textbook for courses. And so, those are our relationship and outreach building, efforts. If there are folks that that CNU should be connecting with, we welcome the suggestions.
So I would try to get this book out to all the architecture schools and landscape architecture schools, because the architects are thinking that gizmos and building design is the answer. And the landscape people are doing their own thing in strange ways that I've been discovering recently. But the actual common sense of all of the instructions or the perspectives that are given here, I think would be eye-opening and enlightening to students who are overcome by the abstraction and a kind of ideology of their educations. And so I don't know whether through the ASLA or the ACSA, the faculty organizations, getting it to the schools, maybe not everybody goes to the library, but just having one in every library would be great. And I also wonder whether I'll ask my students this fall whether having it online wouldn't be more effective with students. I don't.
I just wanted to say that that we will post this on the CNU website probably tomorrow, and that folks who need to peel away can watch it on watch the full video. A few more questions. Is the handbook applicable outside of North America? And maybe Michael Mehaffy would have some thoughts, or Mallory, Ricardo.
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. And I think goes back to everything that we've mentioned, that the way that the book was focused on developed is, and I think the word is accessible. Anyone could read this. This is not meant to be for a group over another group. And it also shows that we're dealing with macro issues, but also regional issues and very local issues. And in a way, they all apply. So my first comment, I'll let Michael answer, but my my first comment is absolutely yes, especially with our expertise not only in the Caribbean but also in South America. It not only makes sense, it actually resonates.
So maybe getting funds to translate it would be something that a foundation would look forward to doing.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the CNU is a primarily North American, US-based organization, and a lot of the focus is on US issues. But the other reality is, unfortunately, the US is exporting our model of sprawl around the world. And we do have an impact, whether we know it or not. One of my frustrations is that we tend to only look at, at our shores and not beyond. And we do need to think globally, to coin a phrase, and understand that these issues are spreading around the world. And the problems and the solutions need to be at the table.
Well, I do want to add, Michael, that not only we're exporting design solutions all over the world from the mainland, but we sadly are also exporting reconstruction solutions, which is the biggest problem. Because many of the biggest companies that are actually following the money, they come in to government design makers, and if they want to get some of the funding, even if it's from a, they're not doing it to from a negative standpoint, but the way they do things in the mainland is not the way necessarily things are done in outside of the US. And that is another part of the conversation that is key, because we can talk about design, but we also have to talk about how those funds are designed to be used. And this is where it goes back to my my dad joke about FEMA. But I think that's something that we are also exporting that is doing great damage outside of the US.
Okay, we had a question. What outreach has CNU done to reach anchor institutions that aren't in higher education? I think for this handbook, we haven't really done any outreach or much outreach yet.
Rob, I've been doing a ton of outreach.
Okay.
What's an anchor institution?
Well, so like I said before, that's sort of the answer of where we're, sharing copies of this handbook with our beginning with those contacts and, friendly contacts in major organizations, peer organizations across the country, and certainly with, as I mentioned, with higher education. I think that in the longer run, part of our goal is to find those inroads to national organizations that maybe aren't common partners at this stage, and finding ways to, I believe that the recommendations in the handbook show where we have connections, say, to engineers and to, public works, some of the government administrators, where there are audiences there that maybe, individual members of CNU have a better relationship, and the organizations haven't worked together yet. And so this is a way where we have shared goals, shared concerns, and the handbook can serve as a tool, as a bridge to connect to some of those major national and international organizations as well.
I stand corrected. Are there any final thoughts before we go today? Doug
Rob,
or Michael?
Can I just mention that one of the things we haven't got to is what else is needed, what's sort of missing so far in this equation. And I would say one of the things is we do need more research on new urbanist projects. That's one of the things I was working on at Notre Dame in that group, and still needs to be done. More, honest evaluations of what's working, what's not. What are the tools that are working? What are the tools kits that we need to maybe further develop, more available to be done. And I'm eager to continue that with all of you and others.
Any other final thoughts? Things we missed today? Doug?
I just want to amplify what Liz said about changing the culture, because I think that's the focus on quality of life and the role that urbanism plays in delivering it has been the movement's strength for 35 years. And so that just needs to be repeated, because I think the people that we inculcated with that idea in the 90s and early 2000s have moved on, and there's a new generation of people that really want to live lives and quality of life and apply their volunteer time and activism to good things. And I think we can shape that. What does it mean to take climate action today? I think urbanism is not necessarily the first thing that comes to people's lips. So I think that's another opportunity.
Mhm.
I would add the importance of social infrastructure. I think that that is something that needs to be looked at in more detail. I know that obviously the book was focused on many different things, but making it palpable for everyone. But the what's going to happen in the next 30, 40, 60, 100 years, and that is all about social infrastructure. And I think that that topic could be looked at in more depth next time.
Mhm. Mhm. I think one thing I'd like to point out is, from the organization's perspective, we spend a lot of time, and attempting to anticipate what the future of the movement needs in terms of resources, in terms of educational tools, in terms of, communication platform. And, I have a 20-year-old daughter. She cares about the crisis. She has cared her whole life about the climate crisis because it is the thing she's known, that she's seen example of. And the ways that we can take those action items and translate those into different strategies for change wherever we can do so, that to me is, the horizon of new urbanism is in many ways built in those action items. And so the more that we can do to spread those action items into more audiences, more geographies, more implementation strategies, the better off we are, both on obviously saving the planet and bringing people along in the process of saving the planet as well.
I build on what Michael suggested about research. Mallory, I wonder whether actually commissioning some of the members, and there are people who spend a lot of time on the listservs bringing facts and figures to our attention, but actually asking some of them to do some of that research and bring it back to the membership. I've been watching the ADU stream on the side, which Rob wisely avoided bringing into the discussion. But for instance, everybody's been thinking that's a silver bullet that everybody should be doing, and maybe we should find out whether that's working. Is it just causing speculation on the upzoning, or are people actually building things in their backyards? That kind of thing. And Michael has already got some of the things, some facts and figures in his essay, but maybe you could make a list of like 5 areas that we should do the research on, because most of us work from observation, we're not science. We have to move more quickly than that. And but even in retrospect, would be great to have some of that.
Noted.
Michael can start the list.
That's right. Yeah, Michael can set us on our path. I can rally the troops.
Yeah, Michael has started the list.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
well,
there's a lot of, just a quick,
Okay.
quick aside, there is a lot of research out there already, and a lot of
Yeah.
what needs to be done is just pulling it together into a mosaic, because it's all fragmented.
Yeah. Well, the Harvard research on Hope 6 was extensive. We don't need that, but that was very useful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, the panelists. It's been a great discussion. Thank you for the people who participated and asked questions. And once again, I appreciate it. And we'll have I look forward to seeing everybody in a future On the Park Bench webinar. So everybody have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob and Mallory.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Stay cool.
Hmm.